Thank you. We'd like to reconvene Urban Planning Committee. And I'll do a quick roll call. Councillor Banga.
I'm present.
Thank you. Councillor Katarina.
Yes, I'm here.
Councillor Henderson. He's here. Not in his chair. And I'm here as well. And I see we are joined by a couple other members of committee of council. Welcome. We are here to finish 6.7, and we were just going to questions of administration. It was selected by Councillor Henderson. Are you ready to go?
If somebody else wants to go first, that's fine. I need to get back in the right meetings.
Go, and then we'll, I think that's important. Yeah. Councillor Henderson will be asking questions momentarily.
Councillor Katarina can go first.
At your discretion, Councillor Henderson.
Sorry, I just didn't have a chance to switch my computers over to the right meetings. I
Why
can,
don't you go, Councillor Henderson,
Yeah.
because I know where Councillor Katarina's going.
Okay. Yeah, I guess I'm struggling a little bit, because I have absolute, belief that there's something we need to do here around this. I'm just not sure where we're at right now is going to answer the issues that I think need to get answered. And I'm just wondering, what a next step would look like. Because recognizing that it's probably, because it's not about architecture, it is, but it isn't, but it's hard to protect the architecture because it's diverse. There's something here that I think is about the layout and the feel of the neighborhood that if I understand, is what our heritage people would argue we should be protecting, but I'm not convinced what we have here gets us there. And just your thinking on that.
Well, Councillor Henderson, thank you for that feedback, and I think we've heard a variety of different perspectives, and we've had some merging and changing policy direction. I know this project has had a long history with direction from council from a number of different occasions, but with the city plan and our work on the zoning bylaw renewal and the equity component of the work that we've been doing, as well as just changing views of society over the last 15 months, it does cause a bit of pause in terms of, is this the right direction in terms of the blanket DC1. So, where to from here? Our recommendation to committee, based on some of what we've heard here today, I think is there's a good observation around a gap in terms of strategy associated with heritage planning and looking at the city as a whole, because I do believe preserving our heritage assets is absolutely essential for us as a city as we go forward, and it's not develop anywhere and develop anything, that preservation component really needs to have an essential grounding as we implement city plan. Yeah,
it strikes me there was some really interesting work that unfortunately for various different reasons I don't think we ever were able to finish that may be useful to think about in the Old Strathcona area. And unfortunately when Old Strathcona Foundation ceased to exist, I think we lost it. And it was work we were doing with UNESCO that was really talking about understanding the cultural import of a neighborhood. So it wasn't about copying the cornice. It was about understanding what made the culture and the street work. And I'm wondering if that's, and what worries me about what we have here is that it's not going to protect the actual essence of what we're trying to hold on to. I mean, I was really interested, you heard the question that I asked about, if it's about maintaining the feel of the neighborhood, if you have one of those larger older houses that gets subdivided into a number of apartments, are you not achieving that end? And I'm not suggesting that's necessarily the answer, but I think that's what we have to dig into. I'm not entirely convinced we totally understand yet Well, we may understand what we're trying to preserve, but it worries me a little bit that we haven't given ourselves the tools to actually preserve it, and we may end up with something else. So is that the kind of thing that we could sort of explore a little bit further, getting really down into that understanding, you know, in a garden neighbor, in a suburban garden neighborhood, what the essence is that we're trying to hold on to, so that we could then make sure that that's what we're protecting?
Of course, if that was the will of committee, we could further explore that and look at what other tools we have and how those tools align to city plan and any of our emerging policy direction. I don't know if Mr. Schneider has anything to add on that.
Thank you. Yeah, we definitely can take a more strategic citywide approach rather than perhaps a neighborhood-specific approach, so that we are using tools that are appropriate to protect the scale of preservation we're looking for. So for some, it perhaps is just individual properties. For some, it's maybe more neighborhood structure, like the Garden City component. So there is opportunity to look at to take a step back and look at a higher level and look at the needs across the city. So a consistent approach can be.
It would have to be, though, specific. It would, you know, ultimately the choices you come up with are going to have to be specific to the actual neighborhood, right, and the actual circumstance. So one size fits all is not going to work, I don't think, is it?
I don't think so. Not one size would fits all, but I think the strategic approach in terms of, is it architectural features that we're looking to preserve in this neighborhood?
And I think in some contexts,
That would
the answer
be-
would be yes. Each neighborhood's going to be different, and that's part of what we need to remember, and we need to give ourselves the tools to do that. Because this is about something different, I think, from the architectural piece. There's something else at play here, which I think has been flagged for us, but whether or not we're getting there with what's on the table right now, I'm not convinced. I'm out of time, thanks.
Thank you. I'll go to Councillor Katarina.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And Ms. McCabe, the discussion and the work that's been done on the other item today at 6.1, and we heard from similar people speaking to both, and dovetailing this work with the DC1 application, tying it to the work that's going on with the bylaw renewal and restructuring. Everybody seems to agree that that's the direction we should be going, and that's what I hear you saying, if I'm correct.
Councillor Katarina, you're correct, and for me, it's not just tying it to the zoning bylaw, it's also tying it to the district planning work that's also being led by the department right now.
Yeah, and just, we have, as far as I know, I think there are 2 DC1s out there. The Westmount one is the more recent. The one that I'm a little bit more familiar with is Viewpoint. Their DC1 that was enacted many years ago. Is there any information at this point, the pros and cons that plan in particular has consequences of, or has helped, that sort of thing? Because I have a pretty good recollection of that DC1, why it was put in, and then the challenge we had with the Joe Clark residents trying to be sold, and the challenges there. So,
yeah, Councillor Katarina, great observation, and I'm not sure if there's somebody on the line who could give some more context to that answer.
okay.
Yes, so thank you, Councillor Katarina. The ARPs that we have that guide DC1s in other heritage areas, they provided larger land use direction, and the implementation of the DC1 was just one part of that larger direction. But I'm going to ask Scott Ash to speak directly to the Westmount and Viewpoint examples in terms of heritage preservation.
Thank you.
Sorry, Councillor Katarina, can you repeat your question in regards to Westmount, just what the difference is?
No, that's not. Actually, we have the 2 DC1s. Westmount is much more up to date now, but the Viewpoint one has been in effect for many, many years.
Yeah.
And the question was the pros and cons that have been experienced with that being in place for all these years.
Okay, so we have 7 DC1s, area-based DC1s across the city, actually. And of course, there are pros in terms of we definitely, from a heritage perspective, have seen increase in designation in some of the DC1s, particularly Westmount. After we did complete the renewal of Westmount DC1, we've had a number of additional designations in that neighborhood. However, you know, there are cons from administration's perspective as well in terms of administering these DC1s and how the ease with which you can develop within them.
And I think that that's what the conversation today has been, you know, coupled with a number of the other conversations on moving the city plan forward and certainly the renewal of bylaws and other things that are going on in the city now that didn't exist even a year ago, and the commitment to move the city plan forward. And so I'm, Madam Clerk or Madam Chair, at some point I'd like to move a motion, and I'll do it at your discretion.
Why don't you go ahead and do that now, then we can react to it while we're going through questions.
Okay, so I'd like to move, and I think it's up there. I don't know if they've changed. Yeah, the wording has been changed slightly. That administration cease work on the Glenora Heritage Area DC1 and bring a report to committee that identifies resources necessary to complete a new strategic and targeted approach to a heritage resource management strategy that outlines options and tools to address the conservation of heritage resources citywide.
Thank you. So the motion is made. Anything else, Councillor Katarina?
No, I have nothing else on, no other questions. Thank you.
Okay, I'll come around to allow you to close when we're done. I just had a couple of questions, and it really speaks to what we've suggested here. The motion is, so we're going to pause or cease this work at this time, but we've done a lot of work. We'll just build on that, so that's not wasted work. I imagine we'll be building on that. Is that the intent?
What we would do is we'd seize the engagement on it. We'd go back and determine what it would take to do a heritage management strategy, come back to committee. Upon approval of that, then we would be able to develop that strategy document. Then what would happen to the work that's been done here to date is that would help inform that strategy document, as well as it would help inform any potential ways forward in Glenora with respect to this DC, if there was another tool perhaps, or another way to apply the DC1.
Thank you. And I think what we heard today was the importance of a broad public engagement when we get to that resource. We heard the value of making sure we use the GBA Plus tool that we have in place and creating a plan for the city. And I imagine it could be principles that we work on in many neighborhoods could become different, but the principles would probably remain the same. Would that be what you're looking at?
Yes, that would be a very solid approach, Councillor.
Okay, so I'm happy to support that. I think it's a way forward, and it'll doesn't lose the work that informs our work, but I think we, in light of the city plan and where we're going, we really need a broader strategy. So thank you very much, Councillor Katarina, for bringing that forward. I am going to Councillor Banga on the committee.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a couple questions here. My first question would be, so if any of those applications that do come before us in the meantime, what is going to happen to those with this motion?
Ms. Inkpen, are you perhaps able to answer that question?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm happy to jump in here, Councillor Banga. Those applications we would review on their particular merit. Knowing that there's a larger body of work going on, we can't cease rezoning applications. So we would look at each and every one of those applications on their particular merit, considering the context of the neighborhood and land use impacts, like we always do at public hearing. So hopefully that assists.
So on public hearing a few days ago, and that was, I guess, one of the rezoning in question that necessitated the whole thing there. Things like that would still come in, and then they'll be determined on their individual merit. I suppose that's what you're trying to say.
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay, and so in the meantime, if something is not designated as a heritage, I guess, resource itself, it would, we wouldn't be, I mean, we would do the normal course of action. Sorry, if it is on the list, then we would do with the normal course of action that what we do, which so far has not materialized.
Yes, I think you would review these applications as you have in the past, each on their own merits in consideration of the full context of the neighborhood and with the assistance and direction and advice coming from your own plans as well as from administration through the public hearing process.
Okay. Just to get a clarification on suburban neighborhood hood garden, could you tell me how, or anybody else who could tell me what is the history behind it, or is it the presumed one, or some declaration? Like, how did it come about?
Councillor Banga, just to clarify your question, you're asking about the Garden City suburb and the history associated with that?
Yeah.
Could somebody from the team answer that question, please?
Yes, thank you, Councillor Banga. The Garden City movement emerged post-war, and there are key elements of the Garden City suburb layout that are features, including curvilinear roads, rectangular and irregular shaped lots, wide lots, tree-lined roads and parks, small parks, and tree-lined streets. And the form of development that is common to this is the single-family lot, the large single-family lot. And that is the development form that is prominent for the Garden City suburb.
Okay. So in those days, nobody anticipated what we are going through today, I suppose, in relation to smaller lots and densification, et cetera, et cetera.
Correct.
Okay. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. We'll go to Councillor McKean.
Thank you. Ms. McCabe, I'll start with you. And so the tension that's always been here, that I understand it, is that private property rights trump almost everything. So we might want somebody to designate their house and then access the various grants and maintenance grants that come with that, but we have never forced that upon anybody. No municipality has it in Alberta because of the burden that would put on the taxpayer.
That's correct, Councillor McKean. That is my understanding, and perhaps Ms. Inkpen could add more to that if you'd like.
But go ahead. I understand that to be true, and I've done enough of these that I'm almost just confirming what I know to be true. Sorry.
Yes, you're correct, Councillor.
Thank you. So a DC, in the case of Waha, which is complete, they've worked on it for years and years and years, updated it, got regulations in there when it was guidelines before, still doesn't prevent a demolition of a heritage home. What it says, though, if you're going to rebuild, here's 3 elements you have to include in the design, as I understand that.
That's correct.
Yeah, roof pitch, window style, veranda. And in this case, at the point we're at right now, we're almost looking more like in Glenora, lot size, maybe some building form, but we weren't getting into sort of the heritage. So if somebody demolished a home with this, because of the 16 different architectural styles in there, it's pretty hard to say, follow one of these templates.
Councillor McKean, I think you're bang on with what the tension is associated with this particular DC in terms of the variety of different architectural types in Glenora.
So this is all really complex and frustrating, and and I got to give credit to the community plus our staff, where they've been chugging away on this thing, and it's really hard to do, I get that. I'm a little bit torn on the motion, and I was gonna ask the mover if you would consider the word pause rather than cease. It's not quite as dramatic, so I'll throw that into the mix. But do we think we could get to a place with this whole looking at the whole city where we have more tools to save a heritage home that the owner doesn't want to save?
Not under the current property rights, unless there was something that was to change, I believe, through the MGA.
Provincial legislation really hamstring, yeah.
I can confirm that, as you're aware, Councillor, the municipality has the opportunity under the Historic Resources Act to designate properties, and that's really our one tool to prevent demolition in these circumstances. But as you know, it's a costly endeavor.
Yeah, and we start doing that, it starts getting very expensive for the taxpayer as, you know, as more and more roll in. I get that. I'm not on the committee, I can't vote yes or no. I'm a little concerned about setting aside all the, you know, Glenora's, it's an area of town with, I think we say, the most heritage resources in one area. So ceasing that work concerns me a little bit, because I think it is an important area to keep chugging away on. But I don't know how much staff resources you're putting into that. If you paused it for a couple of months, that might not be the end of the world, but I think it's an area, and I'll ask your opinion on this, Ms. McCabe. Is it not a test case area? Is it not ground zero in a way? And that just to abandon our work in Glenora might be a loss of a lot of learnings that we could apply.
So my opinion, Councillor McKean, in this situation is I think there has been, you know, a very active component of the community that's been really active and engaged to this. I think the team has been doing really great work on this over a number of years based on council's direction. We've got a few things that have been emerging, as I've said, with city plan and the equity work that we've been doing. And I agree that there's a lot of learnings from this example. So the word "seize" to me there provides clarity to administration in terms of stopping the engagement and to take a step back. And if the strategy work was funded, for us to really use the work as a learning into the overall strategy, and then to look at the work again with a fresh set of eyes after we've done a wider engagement with Edmontonians on heritage.
I'm way out of time. Thank you, Ms. McCabe.
Thank you. We'll go to Councillor Knack.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I want to ask a little bit more about that. So appreciating the learnings that we have experienced as a city, and I recognize, and I think they're very important flags about equity, about the issues that have been raised. I guess what I'm trying to figure out is, let's assume this continued, why we wouldn't just make sure we bring that in, and you know, so you don't cease the work or you don't pause the work, but you say, okay, well, you know, we've done some work, some of it's obviously there's a few things we need to address, and most importantly, I think the voices of those who haven't been participating, who live in Glenora, that's obviously a big concern around property rights. So why couldn't that just happen and get this one done? Because you're pretty close to the finish line.
Councillor Knack, for us to continue the work and to come back with what a heritage resource management strategy would look like is not realistic within the current resources that the team has in this space. So I think
So the concern is if we want a broader strategy, they can't do both. They can either finish this work or they can do a strategy, but you don't have the resources to do both. Correct?
that is my concern, yes.
Okay. And I guess it's a little tough to answer because we don't have the report that this would bring. But I imagine one of the concerns would be, how long does that take? Because I mean, I think Councillor McKean's talked about it, Councillor, like we've talked about heritage and preserving and all these things for many, many, many years. And do we have any sense about how long that work would then take to get to a point where you could put something in place?
I don't today, and I don't want to hazard a guess because I'd like to go back and work with the team on that. There's a due date of, on this suggested motion of fourth quarter of 2021, and I think we could come back with what that would look like in terms of a resource plan associated with that.
Resource plan and timelines and that. And I just, and so it's an interesting question because I don't disagree, but I think as a city, so let me make sure I'm understanding everything. And over the last couple of years, we've done sort of heritage work in different areas based off motions, and we had a bit of an identified prioritization list. Would that be fair to say of what we were working through across the city?
Yes, we have been doing that over time, and as a department, we've been really focused on trying to keep to the work plan associated with the city plan implementation in terms of zoning bylaw renewal, district planning, growth management framework, as well as a number of other major projects that are underway.
Yeah, and there's no other. There'd be no other spots in the queue after this, though. Right now, there's spots on the list, but nothing that's funded or approved after this. Correct?
Nothing that's funded or approved, but if this targeted approach to resource management strategy, the heritage resource management strategy was to pass, then that would really give policy direction on where to next. I'm sure the team has some thoughts on this, and engagement from Edmontonians would help inform that as well.
Mm-hmm. And so there's, okay, yeah, I feel I'm asking a lot of hypotheticals, which I realize you'd want to answer in that, but all I'm trying to understand is that, feels like we've invested this money, we had approved this a few years ago, and is it worth, in a way, does it sort of throw away that work, which I'm hearing it doesn't necessarily do that, but it's like, is it better just to finish this with the new requirements, with the built-in pieces, and then do that work, or is it better to stop this, at sort of the nearing the end, where 90% of the way or 80% of the way, and does that then feel like it's a wasted time and effort for folks who have been involved so far? Recognizing not everyone from Glenora has been involved yet, but there are folks who have been engaged for some time. And so that's not a question you can answer as I say it out loud. It's a hypothetical for me, and I'll stop talking. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll go to Councillor Henderson then.
Yeah, looking at the motion, I share some of the nervousness about ceasing, because I think we heard, correct me if I'm wrong, in no uncertain terms, that there is something of value here that is worth making an attempt to preserve. I think that's what got us here, and I think we have to recognize that. Whether or not we're there yet of figuring out how to do that, I think is a different question. But I'm nervous about that if we do cease, that 5 years from now, someone's going to have to start from scratch on this. I'm not convinced that a citywide strategy, which I think is overdue, is going to answer this specific question. Having said that, I don't think we're there yet. So the nice thing about pause is we can have a look at what might be in the strategy and then reconsider this when the report comes back about whether or not how we want to deal with this. So I'm inclined to make it, I don't know if it'd be friendly, but Ms. McCabe, any thoughts on that? Because I'm inclined to make that as an amendment. And the motion could be to cease when you come back with the report, right? But I think I'm wondering if we're being premature and ceasing it right now.
I understand your question, Councillor Henderson, and I think that regardless of what word's there, what will be important is that we're not going to continue engagement with Glenora right now because we're not going to go to the next step in terms of writing the bylaw. So I think that's an important distinction to make, but if if this motion was to pass, that we would turn our resources to responding to what do we need to do a strategy overall
Because
for the city.
I think, the reason I'm questioning the strategy piece, which I love, but we've danced around these questions of strategies to no avail for decades. So I'm not terribly hopeful that there's any magical answers out there that we haven't already tried to explore in terms of a citywide strategy. But I think there may be individual tools. And it strikes me, so I wouldn't mind your thinking on this, that these kind of conversations, if they're appropriate as any part of another discussion, are more appropriate in the district planning discussion than they are in an overall citywide zoning discussion. I don't know how we would be able to answer this. You know, these are really the kind of questions I would hope that will come out of a district plan discussion. Am I missing something?
Councillor Henderson, yes, the district plans can comment on them, but they're policy-based, not regulatory-based, and so they can't be used necessarily to the full extent in implementing the desires of preservation.
No, I recognize once you've done the district plan, then you probably have to do the the regulatory piece. But if you were going to make it part of a discussion, these are local in a way. These are they are inherently local because they're about diversity. They're not about commonality, correct?
Agreed, and so that's why, I just caution that district planning might not be the right tool either for that,
But they may be able to, but making it part of that discussion makes more sense to me than making it part of a larger zoning discussion. Then you go, how do we do this?
I
Once you've
understand.
done the district plan, right?
Councillor Henderson, sorry, I understand
Yeah.
now. When we come back with the city plan implementation report in August, that is something, or perhaps when we come back with this report, we can address how we do the engagement associated on an overall heritage strategy. I think that's a point you're making in terms of how we engage on it.
I'm totally in favor of doing the heritage strategy. I think there's a piece of the puzzle here that is more specific. We've been told that this is important and we're going to have to figure it out. And I understand Councillor McKean's point that we shouldn't be losing that. Pausing it while we understand what the other piece of work is, so we understand where it fits, makes sense to me. But I think we're going to have to come back to this. I would hope that the answer is we come back to this, yeah? At some point.
Absolutely, we'll come back to
Yeah.
this at some point,
Yeah.
yes.
And the one other question I had in terms of this is my memory is we're getting a report back on heritage preservation at some point in the near future because we recognized it was time to look at it again because it's still, I'm not sure we're ever going to be able to fix it without provincial help, quite frankly, and we tried there and the province said no. But there are some other reports that I think are already coming back, and I think there's an audit piece as well. So I'm wondering if these things need to come together, or we're going to have a whole bunch of things that are working at similar, but, so just thoughts?
Yeah, potentially. So we would look at how we could nest them together if it makes sense for them to come together. If not, want to go touch base with the team on this if this
Yeah.
motion was to pass and see how we nest this with a few other things that are happening. We've been
Yeah.
trying to be intentional about that in terms of the types of reports that we're bringing to Urban Planning Committee on the same day.
And I can't remember what that other report is. I know Mr. Ash and Mr. Johnson are on the line, but I thought there was some work that we were going back and having a look at our processes right now yet again. So I'm out of time. I would like to put a motion on an amendment on the table. It may or may not be friendly to change the word cease and put in pause.
Well, let's reach out to the committee and see if it's friendly. Would that be friendly, Councillor Katarina, on your part?
If I can respond to that, that was the original motion, Councillor Henderson and Councillor McKean. Thanks for bringing it up. The recommendation for cease, I believe, works much better for administration going forward and working on the overall plan. So I'm going to defer. I proposed pause originally, but I'll defer to Ms. McCabe and her team on why I think the suggestion was made to cease in order to transition this work. And the point of losing this work with the word cease, that's not the intent. The work that the society has done is very, very valuable, and that will be included in the work ahead for the sort of citywide plan, and it'll be very informative, the work that they've done. So I don't see any the chance of losing that work altogether at this point. So I'll let Ms. McCabe answer, and then if you'd like to make that motion, Councillor,
I'm prepared to make the motion, because I think Ms. McCabe and I have just had that discussion, so I'll make the motion.
But what I heard was, I think it's friendly, so.
so
Any
maybe
objection to
if I
that?
could finish, if I could get an answer from admin?
If I may interrupt for just one moment, would it be possible to send the first part of the motion up to council, just with the direction of either pausing or ceasing work? And then the second part can come back to committee as is.
I'm only seeing one part. Where's the second part?
We'll update it real quick. Just the first portion where it says that administration cease work on the Glenora Heritage Project DC1, that would be part one that would go up to council, and then the rest of the motion would go and bring back a report.
I don't know if that's needed.
I don't know which one of us is on the board right now. I'll come back on if that's okay.
I'm not sure either.
We're trying to get into the first part of the motion, and I guess I will jump in and then we'll go. I am not sure that we need it to go to council. I guess that would be my question, because it's really about continuing on with the work, so. Would someone help me there?
Yeah, I would agree with that comment. And given that we've seen the gaps in the GBA lands that have been involved in this, we've seen the gap on property rights and their submission on a blanket zoning. I think we're at a point now where using the work that's been done to get to this DC1 or application for DC1 can be transferred over very easily to an overall plan and would give the department enough teeth or resources at some point, obviously, to carry out this work. I think that we've seen enough changes now in the last year and a half on direction that the city is going with the new city plan and the renewals and on and on and on. And the gaps that have been identified, I think it's warranted that we cease the DC1 per se. And that's my concern is that blanket DC applying to personal property by one group over another, I think is really, really problematic. And so I'm going to leave it the way it is. And I'll leave that as my close. Thank you.
So I'll go to Councillor Henderson. You want to make an amendment?
Yeah, I would like to amend it. I mean, one of the possibilities is to go to pause it until we get the report back, but which would be really my intent. But it's clumsy to word it that way, and I think it may create the wrong expectations that we would automatically go back to work when that report comes back. But I think the debate about whether or not to continue with the DC1 or another tool needs to happen when we get that report back and understand more about what's in that report. So I think there may be a recommendation to cease the work that comes back with that report, but I think that's the better time to do this. So for that reason, I'm going to move that we replace with the word pause. I just think, given that very few of us will be here when this conversation comes back, or at least half of us won't be, including the councillor that I think has been working harder on this, I think we just need a place to hold to make sure that there's reference to this when that strategy comes back, and then when you have that in your hand, you can decide whether or not you want to pause this further. But right. Otherwise, I think there won't be memory of this when it comes back from the people that'll be making the decision, and that's problematic, and we run the risk of losing some important work and the impetus for doing this to begin with.
Okay,
So I move it for that reason.
I have an amendment on the
Yep.
floor. I'll go
For that,
from-
Madam Chair, I consider that friendly because that was the original wording to start with. So if that helps, certainly I would consider that friendly.
Okay, so we're going to consider that a friendly amendment to change from cease to pause. And I have Councillor McKean. Was that on the amendment that's no longer there, or additional thoughts?
With the change of language. I was concerned about the historical board's reaction and how it could be misinterpreted. I really appreciate this. Thank you, Councillor Caterina, and I agree with a lot of the issues you raised. Very complex, but thank you for that, and I should probably just shut up now, which I'll do.
Thank you. So we have a motion on the floor that's been amended friendly. So I'm just looking if someone wanted to speak to it prior to me calling the vote. Anything else? So I have Councillor Henderson, and then we will go to close.
Yeah, I do want to speak to this. I'm nervous, a little bit nervous about this, because I think there is something important here that I'm scared we're going to lose. I'm not sure we're on top of it yet, which is why I think, a rethink is important, and I'm not convinced that continuing to go down the road of the DC1 is going to get, obviously we could go back and do more public engagement. I think we'd be back here and having the same argument. So, but I don't want this to be interpreted as that we don't think there's something important here in Glenora that we may not be totally on top of dealing with that has value, not just to Glenora, but to the city as a whole, in terms of holding on to who we are and where we've come from, and the diversity of our city. So I just want to say that out loud, because I don't want my intention in this to be misinterpreted, because I think there is something really important here that we should not and cannot walk away from. We continue to do this and erase, the city that we were. And I think that's really problematic, and we're going to have to grapple with that, despite some of the intent of the city plan that assumes that we'll continue to shift and change, but we can't do that by erasing everything in our past. So anyway, I just wanted to say that out loud, so thanks. I will support it, though.
Thank you, and I'll just speak to it briefly. I really appreciate the motion, and I think it recognizes the work that's happened. But it also recognizes that we need to do some additional work in order to move this forward. And I think the city plan does consider heritage as important, but I think we weren't ready with this report to move it forward. So knowing what we know about some of the engagement, GBA Plus, that's really important for us to take a pause and make sure that we've got it right, because we don't get to do it very often. So with that, I'll go to Councillor Katarina to close.
Madam Chair, I concur with both your comments and Councillor Henderson's, Councillor McKean, Councillor Banga's. So that's my close. We can go ahead and vote.
Ditto. So with that, I'll call the vote. Please vote on the motion.
Just waiting for Councillor Katarina's vote and your vote as well, Madam Chair.
It hasn't showed up, but I do have a red line flashing, so I'm a yes.
Thank you.
Yes, as well for me, Madam Clerk.
Thank you, Councillor Katarina. We have 4 votes.
And display the vote. And that is carried. Well, that will conclude this item. It concludes our agenda. The only thing I need to ask is for notices of motion.